September 28, 1930. Long Island's Gold Coast. Morning light cuts through the windows of Hempstead House and finds a man dying. Daniel Guggenheim, 74 years old, mining magnate. Once he controlled 75% of the world's copper, silver, and lead. Once it was said he could make or break a government with a telegram. The family fortune by 1918, $250 million to $300 million. Second only to the Rothschilds among Jewish families worldwide. The house around him rises 3 stories, 50,000 square feet, 40 rooms, Tudor revival in granite and Indiana limestone, an 80-foot tower, a 60-foot entry foyer where light pours through stained glass, a library copied from the palace of King James I, a palm court designed to hold 150 species of rare orchids under glass. Beautiful. Yes, but beauty is never free. 17 house servants move through corridors painted institutional grey. Maids, footmen, cooks, laundresses, each drawing wages. Beyond the formal gardens, 200 farmers and groundskeepers tend 216 acres. Every week, paychecks, every month, coal by the ton. The bills never sleep, and neither do the dead. Deep in Chile's Atacama Desert, a cemetery holds 2,353 wooden crosses, workers who died in Guggenheim, copper mines between 1915 and 1923. Not estimates. Documented burials. In Alaska, men still remember the night in 1916 when strikers were evicted into -30-degree weather. In El Paso, 600 Mexican workers struck in 1913. Citing exploitative hours, inadequate pay, and discriminatory treatment. The beauty came from somewhere. Daniel bought this estate in 1917 for $600,000, half of what the broken Goulds had spent building it. He thought Guggenheim money could sustain anything. But even emperors discover a 50,000 square foot palace has an appetite that outlasts any fortune. The question forms in the library, in the foyer, in the empty palm court. Who actually paid for this? And how much does beauty cost when you count it in human lives? To understand the palace, you have to understand the patriarch, not Daniel, his father, the man who started it all, Meyer Guggenheim, born February 1st, 1828, Lengnau, Switzerland, a village that doesn't appear on most maps, a Jewish ghetto, one of only 2 places in Switzerland where Jews were permitted to live. The restrictions were specific and humiliating. Jews could not own land. Jews could not practice most professions. Jews lived where they were told and worked where they were permitted. Meyer's father, Simon, was a tailor. When Meyer's mother died, Simon wanted to remarry. He found a widow named Rachel Weil. He asked the Swiss authorities for permission. The answer was no. Reason: insufficient financial means. Simon was too poor to support a family of 13 children, 7 from his first marriage, 6 from Rachel's. The poverty wasn't a problem to solve. It was a legal barrier to marriage, to choice, to life itself. Meyer was 6 years old when he learned the equation. Poverty equals cage, money equals key. The lesson never left him. In 1847, Meyer and his father boarded a ship to America. Meyer was 19 years old. They carried no money, spoke no English, knew no one waiting on the other side. Philadelphia was the destination because someone had said there was work there. The crossing took weeks. Below deck, in steerage, the air tasted of salt and sickness. They arrived. No money, no English, no connections, just ambition dressed as necessity. Meyer sold shoelaces door to door. He walked the coal towns of northeast Pennsylvania, knocking, offering, moving. Stove polish came next. He manufactured it himself, a simple product for a simple need. Then coffee essence, an early instant coffee made from chicory. Bitter but cheap. It sold. On the ship from Switzerland, Meyer had met a 19-year-old girl, Barbara Myers, also Jewish, also fleeing limited options. In 1852, they married. Meyer was 24. The poverty was still there, but now it had company. By 1873, they had 10 children. 3 died young, as children did. 7 sons survived. Isaac, born 1854. Daniel, 1856. Murray, 1858. Solomon, 1861. Benjamin, 1865. Simon, 1867. William, 1868. Meyer trained them like a military unit. Each son learned the family business, importing and selling lace and embroideries from Switzerland. Each son had a role. Isaac managed operations in Philadelphia. Daniel went to Switzerland to study the lace trade and serve as a buyer. The others filled gaps as they grew old enough. Together, they became what contemporaries would later call one of the best management teams in the nation. By 1881, Meyer was 53 years old. The lace business was profitable. Not spectacular, but reliable. Enough to live on. Enough to save a little. He had built something from nothing. The Swiss ghetto was an ocean and a lifetime away. Then came the accident that changed everything. Meyer was owed money by a debtor. The debtor couldn't pay in cash. He offered instead half interest in 2 Colorado mines, the A, Y, and the Mini. Silver and lead mines in Leadville, high in the Rockies. Meyer knew nothing about mining. He had never seen a mine. He had no idea how to evaluate ore or manage extraction. He accepted reluctantly because debt owed is debt owed, and something is better than nothing. Then he traveled west to inspect his investment. Leadville sat at 10,000 feet. The air was thin. The town was rough. Miners drank hard and died young. The mines Meyer owned were filled with water flooded by underground springs. One look told him the truth: he had been paid in a liability. Meyer felt foolish. One of his partners sold his share immediately, convinced the mines were worthless. But Meyer had learned long ago not to quit when things looked impossible. He had crossed an ocean with no money. He had sold shoelaces in coal towns. He had built a business from polish and chicory. Flooded mines were just another problem with a price. He invested $20,000, everything he had saved over decades, to pump the water out. The pumps ran for weeks. Slowly, the water level dropped, and when it cleared, the truth emerged. The mines held vast loads of high-grade silver and lead. Meyer Guggenheim, a 53-year-old lace importer who knew nothing about mining, had stumbled into 2 of the richest mines in Colorado. The money began to pour in, but Meyer didn't just extract and sell. He watched. He calculated. He noticed that the smelters, the refineries that processed raw ore into metal, took 40% of his profits. Smelting was the bottleneck, the place where miners had to pay someone else to make their ore valuable. Meyer had spent a lifetime cutting out middlemen. In 1891, he built his own smelter. The family consolidated about a dozen mining operations into the Colorado Smelting and Refining Company. Now they controlled both ends: dig it up, refine it, sell it. Vertical integration before the term existed. Then Solomon, the 4th son, went to Mexico. In 1891, he supervised construction of a massive smelter in Monterrey. It dominated copper, lead, and zinc, refining throughout northern Mexico. By 1895, the Monterrey operation was earning $1 million annually, not total revenue, profit, $1 million a year. The Guggenheims stopped being miners. They became metal barons. In 1899, Meyer and his sons formed a partnership that would dominate the industry for a generation, American Smelting and Refining Company, ASARCO. The trust controlled the country's largest metal processing plants, consolidating power across the American West. The Rockefeller family backed ASARCO initially, seeing it as a stable investment in essential industry. But by 1901, the Guggenheims had seized control. Daniel, Meyer's second son, the one who had gone to Switzerland to learn the lace trade, became president. The empire was no longer American. It was global. By 1910, Daniel directed what contemporaries called the world's most important group of mining interests: Alaska copper, hauled over glaciers; Chilean nitrates for fertilizer and explosives; Bolivian tin; African diamonds; Yukon gold. The list kept growing. By World War I, the Guggenheims controlled roughly 75% of the world's supply of copper, silver, and lead. 75%. They didn't dominate the market. They were the market. Meyer died March 15th, 1905, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was 77 years old. He had turned $20,000 into an empire. He had lifted his sons from immigrant poverty to the second richest Jewish family on earth, trailing only the Rothschilds. The transformation took one generation. From a Swiss ghetto where his father was too poor to remarry, to a Florida estate where presidents visited, from selling shoelaces door to door to controlling 3/4 of the world's metal supply. But the machine Meyer built required constant feeding. More mines, more workers, more metal, always more. The smelters never stopped, the demand never slackened, and the men who fed the machine deep underground, breathing dust, touching ore laced with arsenic and lead, they would pay in ways Meyer never saw, or never let himself see. While the Guggenheims were building an empire, another family was building a catastrophe: Howard Gould, son of Jay Gould, the railroad tycoon. Perhaps the most infamous of all the robber barons, Jay Gould had manipulated railroads and stock markets, crushed competitors, and accumulated one of America's largest fortunes through methods that made even other industrialists uncomfortable. Howard grew up at Lyndhurst, his father's Hudson River estate: 70 rooms, towers and turrets, a Gothic revival castle that announced, "We have arrived." Howard inherited money. He inherited social position. What he didn't inherit was his father's ruthless judgment. In 1900 and 1901, Howard purchased undeveloped land at Sands Point, Long Island, hundreds of acres overlooking the Long Island Sound. The North Shore was transforming into America's Gold Coast, a concentration of wealth unprecedented in the nation's history. The rich weren't just building houses, they were building monuments to themselves. More than 1,200 mansions would rise along this coast between the 1890s and 1930s. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Whitneys, the Morgans, the Woolworths, estates with names like Falaise and Oheka, and Westbury House. F. Scott Fitzgerald would live here from 1922 to 1924 and fictionalize it as East Egg and West Egg in The Great Gatsby. The parties he described elaborate, wasteful, desperate were not exaggerations. They were documentaries. Howard Gould wanted the biggest mansion, not the best. The biggest. There's a difference. He married Catherine Clemens, an actress, born 1874, described by contemporaries as temperamental, which in that era was code for many things. She had ambitions that matched Howard's budget. Together, they would build America's largest private residence, First plan a replica of Kilkenny Castle in Ireland, not inspired by a replica. In 1904, Howard hired Irish architect James Francis Reid to travel to Ireland and survey Kilkenny Castle for exact measurements. Every tower, every turret, every stone. The survey took months. Then Howard commissioned Philadelphia architect Abner J. Hadel to draw up plans for construction. What followed was 9 years of chaos. Hadel submitted a design. Catherine rejected it. He submitted another, rejected, another, rejected. The count grew. 5 designs. 10, 15. Hadel kept drawing. Catherine kept rejecting. 19 designs in total. 19 complete architectural plans for a 100,000 square foot castle. Each one dismissed. In 1907, Hadel quit. Then he sued. Successfully. For his wasted time, his wasted work, his professional humiliation. The lawsuit became public. The newspapers loved it. Wealthy couple can't agree on castle design. Architect sues. Everyone looks foolish. By then, Howard had spent $1.7 million. The main castle, what would eventually be called Castle Gould, remained unfinished. Walls stood, roofs covered portions. But the interior was incomplete, unlived in, a monument to indecision. The marriage collapsed alongside the construction. Howard and Catherine separated in early 1907. The official reason, stated in legal documents, a misunderstanding over the construction of Castle Gould. The phrase is remarkable for its understatement. They couldn't agree on a building, so they ended a marriage. By 1909, they were in court. The trial was sensational. Newspapers covered every accusation because the public appetite for wealthy scandal was insatiable then as now. Private detectives testified. Hotel maids took the stand. Catherine's spending was itemized. Howard's grievances were catalogued. 2 maids from the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia testified they had seen a man actor, Dustin Farnham, leaving Catherine's suite multiple times, at hours that suggested more than professional association. Howard accused Catherine of an affair with William F. Cody Buffalo Bill himself, the aging Wild West showman, whose health was declining. Some whispered that Catherine's abandonment had hastened Cody's descent into illness and alcoholism, though the truth was likely more complicated. Cody was already ill, already drinking, already broke. Catherine's defense was tone-deaf. In court, she complained it was hard to dress well in Manhattan on $40,000 a year. $40,000 in 1909. The average American worker earned perhaps $500 annually. Catherine was asking for sympathy because her clothing allowance equaled 80 years of a typical salary. The public was not sympathetic. But here's what's remarkable. Howard kept building, even as his marriage died in public, even as the scandal exploded across newspapers from New York to San Francisco, even as his name became synonymous with wealthy dysfunction. He commissioned a second mansion on the estate, a more intimate residence, smaller, just 50,000 square feet, just 50,000 square feet. The phrase reveals everything about perspective in the Gilded Age. Howard hired Hunt and Hunt, the sons of Richard Morris Hunt. Richard Morris Hunt had been America's greatest architect, first American trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, designer of the Metropolitan Museum's facade, the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty, mansions for the Vanderbilts. His sons inherited his firm and his reputation. They understood how to blend French Renaissance and English Tudor with American scale and American money. The result was Hempstead House, Completed 1912. Tudor Revival style. The exterior was granite and Indiana limestone, not local stone, shipped stone. The Indiana limestone came from quarries 500 miles away, carved by specialists, numbered, transported by rail. The granite came from upstate New York. Each block cut and fitted by Italian stonemasons who brought Old World techniques to New World ambitions. The house measured 225 feet long, 135 feet wide, 3 floors, 40 rooms. An 80-foot tower rose above the roofline, visible for miles across the Sound. The entry foyer climbed 60 feet as tall as a 6-story building with a vaulted ceiling, stained glass, and a chandelier that weighed hundreds of pounds. Inside, every room announced expense. The library was panelled in walnut, copied from a room in the palace of King James I, not similar to, copied from, measurements taken, details replicated, history purchased. The billiard room featured a gold leaf ceiling, hand-tooled leather walls, and carved oak from a 17th century Spanish palace. How the oak got from Spain to Long Island involves dealers, auctions, and shipping manifests. Authenticity required logistics. The sunken palm court occupied the center of the house. Glass roof, climate control, designed to hold 150 varieties of rare orchids, tropical plants, and potted trees. The engineering required to maintain humidity and temperature in a Long Island winter invisible but essential. Boilers, ductwork, a maintenance staff who understood horticulture. Construction cost over $1 million, equivalent to more than $30 million in current dollars. The builder was E. W. Howell and Company of Babylon. The interior decorator was W. M. Baumgarten and Company. Both firms specialized in wealthy clients who expected perfection and paid for it. But the construction cost was only the beginning. The true expense was operational. The estate required 17 domestic servants just to run the house. Not occasionally, constantly. Maids to clean and change linens, footmen to serve meals and answer bells, cooks to prepare 3 meals daily for family and staff, laundresses to wash mountains of clothing and sheets, a butler to manage the hierarchy. Each servant drew wages, each required housing, feeding, supervision. Beyond the house, the estate needed over 200 groundsmen and farmers to maintain 300 acres. Lawns required mowing. Gardens required planting, weeding, pruning. Stables housed horses and carriages and later automobiles. Greenhouses grew vegetables and flowers year-round. A working farm supplied dairy, eggs, meat. The infrastructure was a small village, feeding itself, maintaining itself, requiring constant capital. For context, nearby Oheka Castle, Otto Khan's estate, employed 126 full-time servants and featured 39 working fireplaces. These weren't homes. They were private fiefdoms that happened to have bedrooms. Howard finished Hempstead House in 1912, 11 years after buying the land. 19 rejected architectural designs, 1 lawsuit settled, 1 marriage destroyed, $1.7 million spent on a castle he never wanted to live in. Another $1 million plus spent on the house he did. He stayed 6 years. In 1917, with World War I raging in Europe, with American entry imminent, Howard Gould moved to Europe. He sold the entire estate, 216 acres, Castle Gould, Hempstead House, all furnishings, all art, all infrastructure for $600,000. $600,000. Less than half of what he had spent on Hempstead House alone. Less than a quarter of his total investment. The sale was not strategic. it was surrender. The buyer, Daniel Guggenheim, mining magnate, second son of Meyer Guggenheim, the man who controlled 75% of the world's metal, age 61, president of ASARCO. At the peak of his power and his fortune, Daniel had the money Howard had spent. Daniel knew how to manage operations at massive scale. Daniel understood infrastructure because he had built mines on 3 continents, smelters in Mexico, railways over Alaskan glaciers. He knew what it cost to move earth, process ore, house workers, maintain machinery that never stopped. But understanding infrastructure and affording infrastructure are not the same thing. Howard Gould had understood what he wanted. He couldn't afford what it required. And Daniel Guggenheim, with all his millions, with all his experience, with all his mining empire behind him, would soon discover a truth that transcends wealth. A 50,000 square foot Tudor castle by the sea has an appetite that never sleeps. Daniel Guggenheim bought Hempstead House in 1917. He was 61 years old, president of ASARCO, director of what contemporaries described as the world's most important group of mining interests. His brother Simon was a United States Senator from Colorado. His brother Solomon was building an art collection that would become a museum. His brother Benjamin had died heroically on the Titanic 5 years earlier, dressed in evening wear, going down like a gentleman. And Daniel controlled the metal that built the modern world. The empire's reach was staggering. Let's count the mines. Let's map the operations. Let's see what 75% of the world's copper actually means in geography and human effort. Leadville, Colorado, the foundation, high-grade silver and lead, where Meyer had started in 1881 with $20,000 and flooded mines, still producing, still profitable, the original Guggenheim claim, Monterrey, Mexico, Solomon's smelter, built 1891. It dominated copper, lead and zinc refining throughout northern Mexico, under the autocratic president Porfirio Diaz, who ruled Mexico for 3 decades. The Guggenheims became the leading industrialists south of the border. Diaz welcomed foreign capital. The Guggenheims brought it. By 1895, the Monterrey operation earned $1 million in profit annually, not revenue, profit. Kennecott, Alaska. Starting 1906, Daniel formed the Alaska Syndicate with J. P. Morgan and Jacob Schiff, 2 of the most powerful financiers in America. Together, they built the Copper River and Northwestern Railway across 200 miles of wilderness, over glaciers, through mountain passes. The engineering was audacious. The cost was enormous. The copper was worth it. By the end of 1912, the mine had paid $3 million in dividends to Morgan, Schiff, and the Guggenheims, Chuquicamata, Chile. The Chile Exploration Company, founded 1912, the world's largest copper mine during the 20th century, located in the Atacama Desert at 9,500 feet elevation, 45 miles from a water supply, 85 miles from a power source. The Guggenheims built it anyway. They ran pipelines across the desert. They built power plants. They constructed a company town in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, because beneath the desert lay copper in quantities that made logistical nightmares worthwhile. By 1910, Daniel directed the world's most important mining interests. The Guggenheims had added Copper Kings to their earlier title of Silver Kings. They mined tin in Bolivia, diamonds in Africa, gold in Peru and the Yukon, nitrates in Chile for fertilizer and explosives, rubber in the Belgian Congo, copper in Australia. The list of operations spanned continents, climates, governments. It was said that Daniel Guggenheim could make or break a government with a telegram. This was not metaphor. This was documented power. Political leaders across South America understood the equation the Guggenheims controlled essential resources: copper for wiring, lead for pipes and ammunition, silver for currency and industry. Cross the Guggenheims and your economy suffered, cooperate, and capital flowed. Daniel didn't just run a business, he operated what we would now call a geopolitical force. By 1915, Daniel controlled almost 80% of the world's known silver, copper, and lead deposits. He had the power to dictate prices on the open market. When Europe went to war in 1914, metal prices soared, demand became insatiable. The Guggenheim fortune grew accordingly. But let's step past the grandeur and ask the question that matters: what did this machine actually cost? Not in dollars, in human beings. Chuquicamata, Chile, 1915 to 1923. 8 years of Guggenheim ownership before they sold to Anaconda Copper. Recently discovered cemetery records provide a precise count: 2,353 deaths during Guggenheim management. Not estimates, not approximations, documented burials, wooden crosses in the Atacama Desert, names carved or painted, dates recorded, causes of death noted when known. The research comes from Chilean University archives, the Archivo Histórico de la Universidad Católica del Norte. Scholars spent years analyzing cemetery records, company documents, migration patterns, causes of death, timeframes, gender ratios, working conditions. The study was published in academic journals. The findings are peer-reviewed. The number is not disputed: 2,353 deaths in 8 years at one mine. What they found goes beyond the death count. The Guggenheims implemented a system scholars call ethnic labor subsidiarity. Bolivian migrants were assigned to the most dangerous underground extraction work, the deepest shafts, the unstable faces where rock could collapse, the areas with poorest ventilation where dust hung thick and breathing became labor. Chileans received surface roles, ore processing, equipment maintenance, administration. The discrimination was structural, deliberate, and profitable. Bolivian workers were paid less for more dangerous work. High injury rates were accepted as operational cost. The environmental contamination was systematic. The expansion of open-pit copper sulfide mining led to widespread arsenic contamination in water sources across the Atacama Desert. Copper ore in Chile contains arsenic naturally. Processing releases it. The Guggenheim operations released it at industrial scale. Elevated arsenic concentrations in drinking water caused respiratory diseases, skin lesions, cancers, and other arsenic-related illnesses among local inhabitants. Not just workers, entire communities downstream, children, the elderly, people who never set foot in a mine. Historical analyses document heightened mortality rates directly linked to environmental contamination under Guggenheim management. The scholars used a phrase that cuts through academic language: the workers subsidized the mining project with their bodies. That's a direct quote from the study. But Chuquicamata wasn't unique. The pattern repeated across the empire. Perth Amboy, New Jersey, 1912. Workers at the Guggenheim mine struck for better conditions. The company brought in strikebreakers, replacement workers, hired to cross picket lines and keep production running. Violence followed. 4 strikers were shot. The company did not prosecute the shooters. The strike collapsed. El Paso, Texas, 1913. At the ASARCO smelter, roughly 600 Mexican workers walked off the job. They were supported by the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, the radical labor union that organized across ethnic and skill lines, the Wobblies, as they were called. The demands were specific 8-hour workday, 20% wage increase, dismissal of an abusive foreman. The complaints were documented exploitative hours, inadequate pay, discriminatory treatment, and hazardous copper processing conditions. Smelters ran hot, fumes were toxic, protective equipment was minimal. The strike lasted several months. The Guggenheims did not yield easily. Alaska, 1916. Workers struck over poor conditions and low wages. The mine was remote. The season was winter. The Guggenheims evicted strikers from company-owned bunkhouses. The workers were left in -30-degree weather. Some froze. The rest returned to work or left Alaska. The strike ended. Contemporary analysis concluded that conditions across Guggenheim operations had come to resemble slave labor. Daniel, like many capitalists of his era, paid starvation wages and forcibly broke strikes. These are not judgments imposed retroactively. These are assessments from the period, from journalists, reformers, and investigators who documented what they saw. During World War I, the criticism intensified. As metal prices soared with wartime demand, Guggenheim profits soared proportionally. The family was accused of profiteering, making excessive profits from national emergency. The accusations led to a wave of anti-Semitism. The Guggenheims were the most prominent Jewish family in America. They became targets. Newspaper cartoons depicted them with exaggerated features. Editorial writers questioned their patriotism. The prejudice was ugly and predictable. President Woodrow Wilson and Congress demanded the Guggenheims lower copper prices to support the war effort. Daniel refused. This was business. Market forces determined prices. The government had no right to interfere. Wilson threatened to nationalize the metals industries to seize control under wartime powers. Only then did the Guggenheims comply. The threat was credible. Daniel backed down. By the war's end in 1918, the family fortune stood at $250 million to $300 million, second only to the Rothschilds as the richest Jewish family in the world. The exact figure is uncertain because the family kept finances private, but the range is documented across multiple sources. $250 million in 1918 dollars, equivalent to several billion today. Daniel controlled almost 80% of the world's known silver, copper, and lead. He had the power to dictate prices on the open market. He could influence elections, topple governments, determine which nations industrialized and which remained agrarian. But controlling the world's metal is not the same as controlling the world's opinion. And by 1922, even Daniel's own family had had enough. Before Daniel bought Hempstead House, before the empire began to fracture, one brother had already chosen a different path. Benjamin Guggenheim, born October 26, 1865, Philadelphia, the fifth of 7 sons, 11 years younger than Isaac, 9 years younger than Daniel. Growing up, Benjamin watched his older brothers build the mining empire. He saw what it required, the calculations, the ruthlessness, the willingness to treat labor as a line item. In 1894, Benjamin married Florette Seligman. She was the daughter of James Seligman, senior partner in J&W Seligman and Company, one of New York's most prominent investment banking firms. The Seligmans were old money, established money, German Jewish aristocracy. The Guggenheims were new money, mining money, still rough around the edges. The marriage elevated Benjamin socially, even as the family fortune elevated him financially. They had 3 daughters: Benita, born 1895, Marguerite Peggy, born 1898, who would grow up to become one of the 20th century's most important art collectors, Barbara, born 1903. Benjamin inherited a great deal of money from his mother when she died in 1900. He worked in the family mining business through the first decade of the new century. But he was restless. He didn't have Maya's drive or Daniel's strategic mind. He reportedly didn't inherit his father's business acumen. His inheritance dwindled through poor investments. The family watched with concern. In 1910, Benjamin made a decision that shocked the brothers. He gave up his rights to a large fortune by terminating his partnership with them. He left the mining empire, started his own business. The details are unclear, something involving pumps, possibly International Steam Pump Company. Whatever it was, it freed him from family obligations and family scrutiny. It also meant he was frequently away from his wife and daughters in New York. He maintained an apartment in Paris. His marriage grew distant. By most accounts, he was living the life of a wealthy bachelor, despite having a wife and 3 children at home. April 10, 1912, Cherbourg, France. The RMS Titanic made a brief stop on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. Among the passengers who boarded Benjamin Guggenheim, age 47. He was not traveling with his wife. His companion was Léontine Aubard, a 25-year-old French singer. His mistress, also aboard Victor Gilliot, Benjamin's valet and secretary, age 24. Emma Segesser, Léontine's maid, age 25. René Pernot, Benjamin's chauffeur, age 40. Pernot traveled separately in second class. The others occupied first-class cabins. Benjamin and Gilliot shared cabin B84. Léontine and Emma occupied cabin B35. The ticket cost £79 and 4 shillings. Some sources cite a different figure, £56, 18 shillings, 7 pence. The discrepancy likely reflects whether the fare covered one passenger or multiple. Either way, it was expensive, but not extraordinary for first class on the world's largest, newest, most luxurious ocean liner. The Titanic was a monument to industrial confidence. 882 feet long, 46,000 tons, 16 watertight compartments, billed as practically unsinkable. The ship that couldn't sink. For 4 days, the crossing was smooth. Benjamin and Léontine dined in the first-class restaurant. They walked the promenade deck. They attended evening concerts. The ship moved at high speed across calm seas, trying to set a record on its maiden voyage. Night of April 14, 1912, 11:40 p.m. ship's time. The Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The collision happened on the starboard side, below the waterline. A glancing blow. The iceberg scraped along the hull for several seconds, opening the hull plates in multiple compartments. Water began flooding in immediately. Benjamin Guggenheim and Victor Gilliot slept through it. They were awakened just after midnight by Léontine and Emma, who had felt the collision and heard the commotion. Emma later recalled that Gilliot responded with a joke. "Never mind. Icebergs." What is an iceberg? The remark reveals everything about their state of mind in those first minutes. No one believed the ship was in danger. The Titanic was unsinkable. The collision was an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. Bedroom steward Henry Samuel Etches knocked on cabin B84 and told Benjamin and Victor to get dressed and come on deck. He pulled their 3 life belts from storage and helped Benjamin into one. Benjamin complained, "This will hurt." The lifebelt was bulky, uncomfortable. Etches didn't care. He pulled heavy sweaters over both men despite their protests. Then he sent them up to the boat deck. The deck was chaos managed by British discipline. Officers loaded lifeboats. Women and children first. The policy was strict. Men stood back and watched their wives and daughters climb into boats designed to hold 65 people, but launched half full because no one believed the ship would actually sink. Leontine Aubard and Emma Segesser secured places on lifeboat number 9. As they prepared to lower away, Benjamin spoke to Emma in German, a language Leontine didn't understand. He said, "We will soon see each other again. It's just a repair. Tomorrow the Titanic will go on again." The boat descended. Benjamin and Victor watched it drop toward the black water 70 feet below. Then Benjamin realized the situation was much more serious than he had implied. The ship was tilting. The bow was sinking. Water was climbing the forward decks. The stern was rising. Lifeboats were leaving half empty because there weren't enough women and children to fill them, and officers weren't allowing men to board even empty seats. The arithmetic was brutal. 20 lifeboats for 2,200 passengers and crew. Benjamin Guggenheim and Victor Gilliot went below. They returned to cabin B-84 and changed clothes. Off came the lifebelts. Off came the heavy sweaters. They dressed in evening wear, white ties and tails, formal dinner attire, the kind of clothing you wear to the opera or a state dinner. Victor did the same. They emerged onto the boat deck transformed. Steward Etches saw them and asked why they had changed. Benjamin's reply became legend. "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." He gave Etches a message for his wife, Florette, back in New York. "If anything should happen to me, tell my wife in New York that I've done my best in doing my duty." Then Benjamin Guggenheim and Victor Gilliot disappeared into the ship's interior. Multiple survivor accounts placed them in different locations in their final minutes. Some said they were last seen sitting on deck chairs, sipping brandy and smoking cigars as the ship tilted further. Another account places them in the grand staircase, closing the door behind them as water climbed the lower decks. A survivor named Rose Amelie Icard wrote that Benjamin, after helping women and children to safety, got dressed and put a rose at his buttonhole, to die. The details differ. The outcome doesn't. The Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m., April 15th, 1912. Benjamin Guggenheim died. Victor Gilliot died. René Pernot, the chauffeur who'd been traveling in second class, also died. Their bodies were never recovered. The North Atlantic is deep and cold. Bodies that weren't picked up by rescue ships within hours sank or drifted away. News reached New York via wireless dispatch on April 18th. The Carpathia, which had rescued survivors, confirmed the passenger list. Benjamin Guggenheim lost. His brother Simon, the United States Senator, waited at the dock for the Carpathia to arrive, hoping for different news. There was none. Steward Henry Samuel Etches survived. When he reached New York, he visited Florette Guggenheim at her home and delivered Benjamin's message personally. He produced the note. That's all he said. Etches reported. There wasn't time for more. Florette and the family were grateful for the information and the visit. They had a story now. Not just death, but heroic death. Not panic, but dignity. Not cowardice, but courage. The newspapers made Benjamin Guggenheim a hero. The man who dressed in evening wear to die like a gentleman. The millionaire who gave up his lifeboat seat so women and children could live. The story fit a narrative America wanted: wealth with honor, privilege with responsibility, the rich behaving nobly in crisis. And the story is true. As far as it goes, Benjamin did change into evening wear. He did refuse to take a lifeboat seat. He did face death with composure. By the standards of behavior on the Titanic that night, he conducted himself admirably. But here's the question that hangs in the air. What does it mean to go down like a gentleman when workers in your mines went down in the dark? Benjamin had left the family business in 1910, 2 years before the Titanic. He wasn't running the mines when 2,353 workers died at Chuquicamata. He wasn't president of ASARCO when strikers were shot in Perth Amboy or evicted in Alaska. But he had benefited from the empire. His inheritance came from Maya's mines. His wealth was Guggenheim wealth, extracted from the earth by men who earned starvation, wages, and died young. Is courage on a sinking ship the same as justice in a mine? Is theatre the same as character? Can a single act of dignity witnessed, documented, celebrated erase a lifetime of wealth built on suffering he never saw or never acknowledged? America remembers Benjamin Guggenheim heroically. There are books about him. Films include his story. The Titanic narrative immortalizes him. But who remembers the 2,353 workers buried in Chile? Who knows their names? Who tells their stories? Benjamin's will left 1/3 of his estate to Florette and 2/3 to his 3 daughters. He designated $115,000 for charitable donations. Florette lived another 25 years, dying November 15, 1937, at age 67. Benjamin's daughter Peggy became one of the 20th century's great art collectors and patrons. She funded emerging artists. She preserved modernist works during World War II. She created a museum in Venice that still bears her name. The Guggenheim legacy in art begins, in part, with her. But it also begins with copper. And the copper begins with men in mines. And some of those men didn't get to choose how they died. They just died. In the dark. Breathing dust. Touching poison. Buried under rockfalls or killed by equipment or worn down by years of exposure until their lungs gave out. Benjamin Guggenheim went down like a gentleman. That's what the newspapers said. That's what history remembers. And perhaps it's true. But going down like a gentleman is easier when you've lived like one. And living like a gentleman in the Gilded Age often meant not looking too closely at where the money came from. Benjamin died in 1912. Maya had died in 1905. By 1922, Daniel had been running the empire for 17 years. He was 66 years old, president of ASARCO, chairman of Guggenheim Brothers, the undisputed head of the family, the man who controlled almost 80% of the world's copper, silver, and lead, the man who could make or break governments with a telegram. That's when his brothers turned on him. The rebellion began quietly, as these things do. Will Guggenheim, one of the youngest brothers, accused the older brothers of excluding him from a profitable copper mine in Chile. Will claimed he had been cheated out of his rightful share. The older brothers Daniel, Murray, Solomon. Simon denied it. This was business. The mines belonged to Guggenheim Brothers, the private partnership, not to individual family members. Will didn't have a claim. Will disagreed. He filed a lawsuit. The case went public. Newspapers around the world covered the accusations. The Guggenheim Empire, it turned out, was cannibalizing itself. The family that controlled global metal markets couldn't control their own disputes. The spectacle was delicious to journalists. Headlines wrote themselves, "Mining magnates in family feud. Guggenheim brothers sue each other. Empire built on silver. now fights over copper. The older brothers panicked, not because they feared losing the lawsuit. They had lawyers, resources, power. They panicked because they didn't want their finances revealed in court. Discovery would expose deals, arrangements, profit distributions, tax strategies, things that were legal but looked bad in newspapers, things that raised questions about Asarco shareholders versus Guggenheim brothers' profits. They settled with Will for an undisclosed sum. The lawsuit disappeared. The newspapers moved on. But the damage was done. The crack had appeared. The family that had presented a unified front for 4 decades was fractured, and fractures spread. 1922. The ASARCO board meeting. Long simmering disagreements reached a climax. For years, minority shareholders and board members had questioned the relationship between ASARCO and Guggenheim brothers. ASARCO was a publicly traded company with shareholders. Guggenheim brothers was a private family partnership. Daniel sat atop both organizations. So did his brothers. The arrangement allowed them enormous flexibility in moving deals between companies. But it also created conflicts of interest. The accusation was specific. The Guggenheim brothers were milking ASARCO for the benefit of Guggenheim brothers. They were using their control of the public company to enrich their private partnership, while ordinary shareholders suffered. Profitable deals went to Guggenheim brothers. Risky ventures stayed with ASARCO. The structure enriched the family at shareholder expense. The board called a vote. Daniel's own family abandoned him. Even members who had worked alongside him for decades worried that his misdeeds reflected poorly on all of them. The characterization was harsh, ruthless, and autocratic management style. Daniel had run ASARCO like a personal fiefdom for 20 years. He made decisions without consultation. He moved money without explanation. He treated board meetings as formalities rather than governance. The behavior had been tolerated when profits were soaring. Now, with profits declining and scrutiny increasing, tolerance evaporated. The vote came down. The ASARCO board voted the Guggenheim brothers out of control. Daniel Guggenheim, the man who had built ASARCO into a global trust, who had negotiated with presidents and toppled governments, who controlled more metal than any human being on Earth, walked out of the boardroom he dominated for 2 decades. He was 66 years old. He had been working since he was a teenager, helping Maya in the lace business. 50 years of labor, 50 years of calculation, expansion, consolidation, dominance, and now this, removed by vote, stripped of control, labeled ruthless and autocratic by the people he'd made wealthy after other family disagreements and business setbacks. Daniel retired in 1923. He was 67 years old. He had 7 more years to live. 7 years at Hempstead House with his wife, Florence. They lived quietly. The man who once dictated global metal prices now spent his days reading, walking the grounds, and managing philanthropic projects. Daniel and Florence had married July 22, 1884. He was 28 years old at the wedding. She was 21. 46 years of marriage. 3 children, Maya Robert, Harry Frank, and Gladys Eleanor. All grown now, all accomplished in their own right. Florence was not ornamental. She had never been content to simply spend money and look elegant. During World War I, she had personally sold $4 million worth of war bonds, traveling, speaking, persuading wealthy Americans to support the war effort. She was treasurer of the Women's National Republican Club from its founding in 1921 through 1938. She managed the club's finances. She represented the organization publicly. She was a political figure in her own right, not merely Daniel's wife. Together, in 1924, they established the Daniel and Florence Guggenheim Foundation. The mission statement was idealistic for the promotion, through charitable and benevolent activities, of the well-being of man throughout the world. The foundation funded universities, medical research, aviation projects, and cultural institutions. It was designed to outlast them both. Daniel had been described throughout his career as stern and puritanical in his business dealings. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He didn't tolerate waste or inefficiency. But he was, nevertheless, a devoted family man. His children adored him. Florence loved him. The contradiction was real. The same man who evicted striking workers in Alaska could be gentle with grandchildren. The same mind that calculated profit margins could write poetry. People contain contradictions. Daniel Guggenheim contained multitudes. But by his mid-60s, Daniel had revealed a new interest that went beyond family repairing the family's tarnished reputation. The strategy was simple and expensive. Share the wealth. Fund universities like the Colorado School of Mines, Columbia University, Johns Hopkins. Support aviation, establish grants for aeronautical research that would lead to innovations in flight. Sponsor free concerts in Central Park so working people could hear symphonies. Build a legacy that transcended copper mines and dead workers and strikes broken by violence. It was a strategy that worked. Slowly, the public's view of the Guggenheims began to soften. They were no longer just robber barons. They were philanthropists, patrons, benefactors. The newspapers that had attacked them for profiteering during World War I now praised their generosity. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was underway. Daniel's health, however, was failing. He suffered repeatedly with stomach ulcers and hypertension, the physical toll of decades of pressure, conflict, and command. His body was surrendering to the stress his mind had endured. The ulcers bled. The blood pressure spiked. His physicians prescribed rest, bland diet, limited activity. Daniel tried to comply. He spent more time at Hempstead House. He walked the grounds slowly. He sat in the library and read. September 28, 1930. Morning, Hempstead House. The 80-foot tower overlooked Long Island Sound. The 60-foot foyer gleamed with imported stone. The library, with its desk copied from King James I's palace, sat silent. Daniel Guggenheim died. He was 74 years old. The cause was complications from his chronic conditions: ulcers, hypertension, the accumulated damage of a lifetime pushing himself past limits. Florence was 67. She had been his partner for 46 years. The girl from the Seligman banking family who had married into mining money. The woman who had raised 3 children, sold war bonds, managed foundations, and run political organizations. Now she was a widow in a castle. She sat at Daniel's desk in the library. The desk copied from a king's palace. The room where Daniel had conducted business, signed papers, made decisions that moved millions of dollars. Now it was hers. Florence studied the numbers, the arithmetic Daniel had always insisted upon. What she saw was sobering. Hempstead House required 17 house servants, a butler, housekeeper, cooks, maids, footmen, valets, ladies' maids, each earning wages, each requiring uniforms, meals, housing. The estate required 200 groundsmen and farmers, men to maintain the lawns, gardens, greenhouses, stables, drives, fences, orchards. The property covered hundreds of acres. Every acre required labor. Every building required maintenance. The heating system burned coal by the ton. The electrical system required constant attention. The plumbing, the roof, the windows, the stone walls, everything demanded care and money. The estate cost a fortune to operate. Not a metaphorical fortune, an actual fortune. Tens of thousands of dollars annually, maybe more than 100,000. The exact figure is lost to history, but the scale is clear unsustainable. The mining income that had sustained this life was gone. Daniel's ASARCO dividends diminished after he lost control. The family business fractured by lawsuits and disagreements. The fortune remained substantial. Florence wasn't poor. But the income stream that once seemed infinite now had limits. Florence faced a choice many widows of the Gilded Age faced: hold on until bankruptcy consumed everything, or let go while she still controlled how and when. She studied the desk, the imported wood, the craftsmanship, the weight of it, the expense. She looked around the library, the books, the panels, the ceiling, the windows overlooking the sound. This house had cost Howard Gould over $1 million to build. It required an army to maintain. It represented everything the Guggenheims had achieved: wealth, power, dominance, beauty extracted from earth by men who died young in places Florence had never seen. She made her decision. Florence Guggenheim chose something unexpected, something that would transform not just her life, but the legacy of everything Daniel had built. Florence Guggenheim closed Hempstead House in 1930. The month after Daniel died, she didn't sell it immediately. She didn't auction the furniture yet. She simply locked the doors and walked away from the 50,000-square-foot castle by the sea. She built something smaller, Millefleurs, a new mansion on the same Sands Point property. Still elegant, still expensive, but manageable. No 80-foot tower, no 60-foot foyer, no 17 servants required. A house she could actually live in without hemorrhaging money. The transformation had begun. 1940. 10 years after Daniel's death, Florence was 77 years old. She held an auction at Hempstead House. Everything inside went on the block. The furniture Daniel had imported from Europe. The art they'd collected over decades. The Persian rugs, the crystal chandeliers, the dishes, silverware, linens, the King James desk from the library. All of it. Buyers came from across the country. They carried off pieces of the Guggenheim dream. The house stood empty. Then came the war. 1940. Britain was being bombed nightly. London burned. Children died in the rubble. The British government launched the Children's Overseas Reception Board, CORB, to evacuate children to safety in America and Canada. Wealthy Americans were asked to host these refugees, give them shelter, keep them alive until the war ended. Florence Guggenheim opened Hempstead House to 75 British children. The mansion that had required 17 servants to maintain for one wealthy family now sheltered 75 working-class children from the Blitz. The rooms that had hosted dinner parties for mining executives now held bunk beds for boys and girls who'd left their parents behind in a war zone. The estate that represented capitalist excess became a refuge. The children stayed until 1941, when a German U-boat torpedoed the SS City of Benares, killing 77 evacuee children. Britain suspended the program. The Hempstead House children returned home. But for a year and a half, the mining fortune had kept them safe. 1942. Florence was 79 years old. She donated 162 acres of the Sands Point estate to the Institute of Aeronautical Sciences, now the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Land purchased with copper money became a gift to aviation research. Daniel would have approved. He'd funded aeronautics projects for years. Florence continued the work. 1944. Florence Guggenheim died. She was 81 years old. She'd outlived Daniel by 14 years. She'd transformed mining wealth into something approximating redemption. Not complete redemption, that arithmetic is impossible, but transformation nonetheless. The Daniel and Florence Guggenheim Foundation continued after her death. It gave more than 400 grants to 98 organizations over the decades: medical research, educational programs, cultural institutions. The foundation finally dissolved in 2011, 87 years after its creation, having distributed the entire endowment as Daniel and Florence intended. But the Guggenheim philanthropic transformation didn't start with Daniel and Florence. It started with the brother who'd spent his life developing Mexican and Chilean mining operations, then walked away to collect art, Solomon Robert Guggenheim, born 1861, died 1949 at age 88. He'd worked in the family mining business for decades. He'd helped build the empire. He'd profited from it enormously. Then, in his 60s, he discovered modern art. Solomon didn't just buy paintings. He formed the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation to encourage non-objective art abstract work that didn't represent physical reality. Kandinsky, Mondrian, Klee. Artists the American public didn't understand or appreciate yet. Solomon collected them systematically. In 1943, Solomon commissioned an architect to design a museum for his collection. The architect was Frank Lloyd Wright, 76 years old, the most famous American architect alive. Wright hated conventional museums, hated the rigid galleries, the sterile walls, the way people shuffled past art like factory workers on an assembly line. Wright designed something radical, a spiral, a continuous ramp rising from ground floor to skylight. Visitors would take the elevator to the top, then walk down the spiral, experiencing art as a flowing journey rather than a series of disconnected rooms. The design was revolutionary, controversial, and expensive. It took 16 years to design and build. Solomon died in 1949, 10 years before completion. He never saw his museum finished. But the building opened in October 1959 on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, an inverted concrete spiral on one of the world's most expensive blocks. The building became iconic immediately. Architecture critics argued about it. Art critics argued about it. The public loved it. The spiral became as famous as the art inside. In 1990, New York City designated it a landmark. In 2005, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 2008, it became a National Historic Landmark. In July 2019, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site. Copper money had become culture. Mining wealth had become architectural triumph. Blood money had become a place where millions of people experience beauty. The transformation spread across the family. Simon Guggenheim, United States Senator from Colorado, established the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation after his son died. The foundation created Guggenheim Fellowships, prestigious grants supporting artists, writers, and scholars. The fellowships became some of the most sought-after awards in American intellectual life. Painters, poets, physicists, historians. Thousands of people received money to create work that might never have existed otherwise. Murray Guggenheim funded free dental clinics in New York. The family donated to Mount Sinai Hospital, Montefiore Hospital, the New York Public School Athletic League. After Meyer's wife, Barbara, died in 1900, he gave $200,000 to Mount Sinai Hospital. The Guggenheims became synonymous with philanthropy. The name that once meant mines and strikes and dead workers now meant museums and fellowships and medical care. But here's the question that shadows every transformation. When does giving away stolen money stop being theft and start being charity? The Guggenheims didn't steal in the legal sense. They bought mines. They hired workers. They paid wages, inadequate wages, but wages nonetheless. They followed the law, mostly. But the 2,353 workers who died at Chuquicamata didn't get Guggenheim fellowships. The workers evicted in Alaska didn't get free dental care. The Mexican families whose sons were shot in El Paso didn't get donations. The museums exist, the fellowships exist, the hospitals exist. These are real goods created with real money that helps real people. But the copper came first. The deaths came first. The strikes came first. Can a museum built on mining wealth ever truly escape its origins? The arithmetic is complicated. Daniel and Florence and Solomon and the others genuinely believed in their philanthropic work. They weren't just buying reputation. They wanted to do good. The cognitive dissonance required to evict workers in -30-degree weather while funding aviation research is staggering. But people contain contradictions. The Guggenheims contained contradictions on an industrial scale. The question isn't whether they gave money. They did. The question is whether giving money earned through exploitation constitutes redemption. And in 2019, an unexpected answer arrived. Workers at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum began organizing a union. The same museum built with mining money. The same institution bearing Solomon's name. The people who keep the museum running the art handlers, the preparators, the educators, the security guards, the maintenance workers decided they weren't being paid enough. The numbers tell the story. The Guggenheim Museum's endowment stood at $134 million. A job listing for associate manager in institutional giving offered $55,000 to $60,000 base salary. In 2023, the average New York City studio apartment cost $3,300 per month. Workers could spend 72% of their income on rent. The arithmetic didn't work. In 2019, Guggenheim workers joined the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 30. In 2021, staff formed a union under United Auto Workers Local 2110. The negotiations took 2 years. 2 years of meetings, proposals, counter-proposals. The museum administration resisted. Workers persisted. August 2023. The first contract was ratified with 97% approval. The contract included a 9% wage increase over 2.5 years, increased retirement contributions, and 4 weeks paid family leave. Not revolutionary, but real improvement. One worker explained the irony perfectly in a statement. Many of us have been with the institution for 15 or more years. It is our institutional knowledge combined with commitment and a high level of skills that continue to facilitate the reputation-building programming. The workers who make the museum function can't afford to live near it. In 2024, union members began negotiating their second contract, still fighting for wages at market value and sustainability of working at the museum. The family that broke strikes in 1912 now has a museum where workers organize. The empire that paid starvation wages now bears a name that workers invoke while demanding fair compensation. Is this irony, justice poetry? All three. The transformation from mining wealth to cultural institution took a century. But the fundamental equation persists. Beauty requires labor. Labor deserves dignity. Dignity demands fair compensation. The Guggenheims learned this lesson once in copper mines. Their museum is learning it again in gallery spaces. Solomon's Museum stands on Fifth Avenue. Florence's mansion stands at Sands Point. Daniel's Foundation distributed its final grants in 2011. The transformation is real. Museums exist, scholarships exist, hospitals exist. These institutions help millions of people. But transformation is not the same as redemption. The 2,353 bodies in Chile can't be resurrected by museum admissions. The workers shot in Perth Amboy can't be compensated by fellowships. The strikers evicted in Alaska can't be warmed by architectural beauty. Both things are true. The Guggenheims created lasting good. The Guggenheims also created immense suffering. Can we hold both truths simultaneously? We must. History requires it. September 28, 1930, Hempstead House. Daniel Guggenheim dies in the mansion overlooking Long Island Sound. The 80-foot tower stands solid. The imported stone gleams. The library with its King James desk waits silently. The bills are paid. The servants are fed. The gardens are tended. Everything is perfect. Everything is expensive. But in Chile, the cemetery at Chuquicamata holds 2,353 wooden crosses. In Alaska, men remember the night in 1916 when they were evicted into -30-degree weather. In El Paso, the grandchildren of workers shot during the 1913 strike still tell the story. The arithmetic extends beyond Hempstead House. Daniel bought the estate for $600,000 in 1917, half of what the Broken Goulds had spent building it. Howard and Catherine Gould had poured over $1 million into construction, then walked away from their catastrophe. Daniel got a bargain. For 13 years, he lived there with Florence. Then he died. Then Florence transformed everything. She closed the house in 1930, built a smaller mansion, Mille Fleurs, nearby, auctioned the furniture in 1940, sheltered 75 British refugee children during the Blitz, donated 162 acres to aviation research in 1942, died in 1944. The mining fortune became gifts. Private became public. 1946. The United States Navy purchased Hempstead House and the surrounding property. They established the Naval Training Device Center. The mansion where Daniel had calculated copper prices now trained naval officers. The Navy made extensive alterations, removed some fixtures, added equipment, used the estate for 21 years, 1967. The Navy declared the property surplus, no longer needed. Nassau County acquired the land in 1971, same year that Harry Guggenheim Daniel's son died and deeded his estate, Falaise, to the county per his will. The family mansions became public property. Today, Sands Point Preserve encompasses 216 acres, 4 mansions, Castle Gould, Hempstead House, Falaise, Mille Fleurs. Friends of the Sands Point Preserve formed in 2003, renamed Sands Point Preserve Conservancy in 2016. The organization maintains the buildings, hosts tours, preserves history. Tourists pay $4 admission, $10 for mansion tours. They walk through rooms where Daniel once read telegrams that toppled governments. They admire the Wurlitzer Opus 445 theatre organ in the foyer, fully restored. They photograph the tower, the sound, the gardens. Film crews use the location regularly. Scent of a Woman, Malcolm X, Great Expectations, The Americans, Billions, The Gilded Age. The mansion became a stage for stories about wealth and power. But here's the question that echoes through the empty rooms: who actually paid for this place? Let's count the costs. Let's do the arithmetic Daniel always insisted upon. Construction cost over $1 million in 1912. Approximately $30 million in today's money, conservatively. The stone, the wood, the craftsmanship, the engineering, all quantifiable in dollars. Operating cost 17 domestic servants, plus 200 groundsmen and farmers, wages, food, housing, uniforms, coal for heating, maintenance for everything. The exact annual cost is lost to history, but the scale is clear, enormous. The human price 2,353 documented deaths at Chuquicamata during 8 years of Guggenheim ownership. That's one cemetery at one mine. 4 strikers shot in Perth Amboy, workers evicted in Alaska, months-long strike in El Paso. The numbers multiply when you count all the mines across all the continents for all the decades. How many died to extract the copper that generated the dividends that paid for Hempstead House? We don't know. We'll never know. But the count starts in thousands. The environmental price arsenic contamination in Chilean water sources, respiratory diseases in desert communities, elevated mortality rates among people who never worked in mines but lived near them, damage that persists a century later. The family price Benjamin lost at sea on the Titanic, brothers turning against brothers in the 1922 boardroom coup, an empire dissolved in lawsuits and resentment, Daniel's final 7 years in exile from the company he built, Florence's 14 years as widow managing the wreckage. Meyer Guggenheim invested $20,000 in 1881. 49 years later, that investment had become hundreds of millions of dollars, dozens of mines across 6 continents, political power spanning nations, and a cultural legacy that would define the family for the next century. 20,000 became hundreds of millions. But what multiplied the money labor? Whose labor workers' labor? And what happened to the workers? Many of them died. Some were shot. Others were evicted. Most were paid starvation wages while mining copper that built the modern world. This is not metaphor. This is documented history. Hempstead House stands today, not as Daniel's summer retreat, not as Florence's memorial, but as public land managed by a non-profit conservancy. The mining fortune bought beauty. The beauty required blood. The blood demanded reckoning. The reckoning took a century. The house survived because its purpose changed. Private palace became public preserve. Mining wealth became cultural legacy. Exploitation became philanthropy or something approximating it. But the central question remains, is transformation the same as redemption? Daniel Guggenheim could make or break governments with a telegram. He controlled almost 80% of the world's copper, silver, and lead. He negotiated with presidents. He influenced elections. He dictated metal prices on global markets. But he couldn't make the arithmetic work in the end. Beauty demands infrastructure. The castle requires 17 servants and 200 groundsmen. Infrastructure demands labor. Those servants and groundsmen require wages, housing, food. Labor demands justice. People who work deserve fair compensation, safe conditions, dignity, justice. Eventually, demanded that the mansion open its gates. Private wealth became public access. Every mansion has its shadows. Every fortune has its cost. The Guggenheims built museums that millions of people visit. They funded fellowships that supported countless artists and scholars. They donated to hospitals that saved lives. They established foundations that distributed grants for decades. They also left 2,353 bodies in a Chilean cemetery. They shot strikers in New Jersey. They evicted workers into Alaskan winter. They paid starvation wages while accumulating hundreds of millions of dollars. They broke strikes forcibly. They contaminated water sources. They discriminated structurally against Bolivian workers. assigning them the most dangerous underground roles while paying them less than Chilean surface workers. Can both be true? They are. They must be. History contains contradictions because people contain contradictions. The Guggenheims were capable of genuine philanthropy and genuine cruelty. They funded aviation research while evicting striking workers. They collected modern art while operating mines that killed thousands. They established foundations for the well-being of man throughout the world while treating miners as expendable resources. The question isn't whether we should visit these places. The Guggenheim Museum on Fifth Avenue is magnificent. Hempstead House is beautiful. These places exist. They serve public purposes now. They provide value. The question is what we see when we look. Do we see only the gold leaf ceilings and the spiral architecture? Or do we also see the copper mines that made them possible? Do we see only the fellowships and the free concerts? Or do we also see the 2,353 crosses in the desert? We should see both. We must see both. The beauty is real. The cost is real. Forgetting either one distorts history. The arithmetic of beauty is complicated. $20,000 became an empire. The empire became museums. The museums display art purchased with money extracted from earth by workers who died young. The museums also employ people today, people who organized unions in 2019 and 2021 because the wages weren't enough. The cycle continues. Different scale, different industry. Same fundamental equation, labor creates value. Value concentrates wealth. Wealth builds beauty. Beauty requires labor. The question is whether the labor receives justice. Daniel Guggenheim died in 1930 believing he'd repaired his reputation through philanthropy. Perhaps he had, partially. Florence transformed mining wealth into public goods. Solomon built museums. Simon funded fellowships. The family genuinely tried to give back. But giving back is not the same as making whole. Transformation is not the same as redemption. Hempstead House stands. The Guggenheim Museum stands. The foundations distributed their money. The legacy persists. The shadows persist too. Both things are true. History demands we see both. The bills were paid. The workers were not. That's the arithmetic. That's the story. That's the cost of beauty when you count it in human lives.